One of the biggest challenges or the hardest things to get right in rent to rent is the contracts and agreements. And if this is a bit of a gray area for you, if you've got some fear or you feel like rent to rent is risky because of this, you're right. And on this video, I'm going to share with you what you need to do to make sure that you get this stuff correct. Because if you don't, you could lose a lot of money, you could get locked up, and you could get all kinds of issues. Hey, I'm Simon, rent-to-rent specialist and mentor, and I specialize in rent-to-rent 2.0, which means I do rent to HMO, rent service accommodation. We get massive cash flow and then we invest that into assets that we own for long-term legacy wealth. And I started this channel to give as much free value to help you on your rent-to-rent journey as possible. So if that sounds good, you're in the right place. Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned. So on this video, I want to talk about rent-to-rent contracts, because this is a really, really scary thing that if you don't get right, you can put yourself at risk, your landlords at risk, agents at risk, and also your tenants stroke guests. So you need to make sure that you get educated. And on this video, I'm going to share with you 3 key things to consider and make sure that you follow. Number 1, your direct to landlord agreements need to be correct. So you don't want to be using any traditional management agreement that a normal letting agent would. You definitely don't want to be using an AST as if you're the tenant, because they will stop you from legally, yep, I said it, legally subletting the property. So in rent to rent, we need to use the correct specialist management agreement or lease agreement that's going to ensure that you know exactly where you stand, that you can legally operate the rent to rent model, and that everybody is protected. So tip number 1, get yourself the correct direct to landlord agreement. Number 2 is letting agent agreements. So yeah, the holy grail is that you, the rent-to-renter, operate directly with the landlord. But sometimes in the middle, and I'm sure we could do some cool animation there, in the middle you've got a letting agent that can broker the deals. The reason this is so important is because if you can leverage a letting agent and they've got 100 different landlords already, you can leverage that situation to scale more quickly. So really, really powerful stuff. But the problem is, most letting agents are going to want to use an AST as well. And you cannot do this because ASTs forbid subletting. You're going to have all kinds of issues with insurances, and they are just not fit for purpose. So what I recommend is using a company let agreement. Now, you are still going to have to make changes to this, because a company let agreement assumes that you are housing your employees. So we do make tweaks, but a company let agreement will allow you to have permitted occupiers that are preordained, that you've agreed. And if you can get the right freedom within that and make the changes, it is a beautiful agreement that's going to work just perfectly for you. So number 2 is make sure that you're educated and that you've got a company let agreement so that you can do deals with letting agents. Top tip, most of the time they will want to use their own company let agreement. So the most important thing is getting educated and knowing what clauses to change, add, and remove. Last but not least, the 3rd piece of information I want to share with you right now is what you should be including in both of these agreements. The first thing is essential, and this is responsibility. In other words, who's responsible for what? So in rent to rent, we are going to be responsible for the utilities and the council tax and the internet, etc. in most cases. So if that's the case in your deal, make sure it states that. In terms of the safety certificates, most of the time, the landlord is going to be responsible for those because it's their property. So also make sure it states that. The key thing with a contract is you know what you're responsible for. The landlord stroke agent know what they're responsible for. So all you have to do is follow. And if at any point this doesn't happen, you've got a contract to have a look and say, hang on a minute, Mr. Landlord, it's your responsibility to do X. The second point is the termination clause. This is one of the most important clauses because in a nutshell, a termination clause will allow you to terminate the agreement if for some reason it's not working for you. So let's say you take a property on, you think it's going to work, and 3 months later, you're losing money month in, month out. You want to be able to trigger that termination clause. And in all my contracts, I aim for 2 months termination clause, and I give them an immediate option to terminate if I don't guarantee their rent or if I don't fulfill my responsibilities. So make sure you've got this in. I have seen people do rent to rent, use a contract from Bob off Facebook, and things go completely wrong because they've not been able to get the deal to work, and then they've not been able to terminate a 5-year agreement, so they've had to pay 6 months rent and negotiate with the landlord. It cost them over £10,000 to get out of the deal. So you don't want that. Now, as rent-to-renters, we never go into a deal thinking we're going to need to trigger it. So you do need to understand how to position this. However, you've got to protect your downside. And last but not least is permissions. Yep. You need to make sure that the landlord or agent know exactly what you're doing with their property and they consent to you renting it out as either a HMO or serviced accommodation, and they've got all the right infrastructure and paperwork in order to legally do this. So important, because if you don't do this, you could be operating rent to rent illegally, and you never want to do that. Hope you found this useful. So many more videos right here on the channel, and I know some of you aren't going to want to spend thousands of pounds on contracts and getting all this stuff sorted. So if you do need help on this stuff, I have put together educational templates that can point you in the right direction. So if you're interested in that, I'll post a link below this video. Check it out. See you in the next video.